Last night, you'll remember, I brought you a disgraceful story that had been broken by the Daily Telegraph that morning. Year 5 and 6 students at a public primary school in suburbs of Sydney had drawn Black Lives Matter posters, including slogans like "Stop Killer Cops" and "White Lives Matter Too Much" and "Pigs Out of the Country." Just shocking stuff, created and displayed at school at the behest of teachers, funded by taxpayers. The New South Wales Police Minister didn't hold back.
Unfortunately, this isn't an isolated case. We know that. We know that there is an element in the teaching fraternity that just wants to turn the kids that they're in their care into radicals, and to in that manner sidestep their obligations to actually educate the kids.
You believe that government-paid school teachers in New South Wales are deliberately radicalising children against the police?
No doubt about it. There is no doubt about it. And 2 years in as the police minister, I've seen it time and time again, and I've got to call it out.
Yeah, well said, David Elliott. Strangely enough, no one from the Teachers Union would agree to speak with us today and respond to those claims and explain their actions and tell us what the Teachers Union is doing about all of this. So instead, I caught up with Kevin Donnelly, who you know is a national education specialist and advisor. Kevin, thanks for joining us again. You've seen and done it all when it comes to Australian education. Could it be as bad as David Elliott suggests, that public school teachers are actively radicalising school children, even against the police?
I'd like to believe it wasn't, Chris. I mean, I taught for many years. My wife was a teacher. One of my friends are teachers. Not all teachers are engaged in this kind of mind control, indoctrination, but too many are. And when you look at subject associations like the English teachers, if you look at the Australian Education Union, if you look at a lot of academics who are teaching the teachers, then for over 30, 40 years now, there's been this long march, as I call it, where those with a cultural left ideology are trying to take control of the classroom, and they've been very successful. We only saw that this week. Take control of the classroom and to teach this, what really is neo-Marxism, this inspired ideology.
Well, I'll come to the origins of all this in just a moment when I discuss your book, but when it comes to this situation in New South Wales, these posters about killer cops, what should the state government do about this? Should teachers be dismissed? How can they eradicate this sort of activism?
There needs to be greater supervision. I mean, I'm not saying we go back to the old days of inspectors going into classrooms, but we need to have a better approach to looking at what the curriculum is, not just at the macro level. You know, I reviewed the national curriculum. There's a state curriculum. You need to have a better idea of what schools are actually doing in terms of teaching week to week, month to month. Now, some kind of audit process, that should be what I'd be looking at if I was the education minister. And if that means people go into schools, teachers who have the experience, have the knowledge, have been around for a while, to check on classroom teachers, then that's what we should do.
Now, you mentioned the long march through the institutions. You've got a new book out on cancel culture and how that's impacting the, I suppose, intellectual life of this country and others. When we see the prominence given to identity politics in our universities, when we see the subjectivism and the activism in our universities, it's hardly surprising that they're churning out activist teachers.
When I taught, I was a member of the AATE, the National English Teachers Association. One of the reasons I left many years ago was because after John Howard was re-elected, the editorial in the Journal actually complained, told teachers in classrooms, you're not doing a good job. You're not teaching young people how to think, because too many young people voted Conservative. Now, the English Teachers Association more recently put out a dictate to schools. English teachers, by the way, you can't teach gender-specific pronouns. You can't teach he or she, which is absolute madness. But when you look at even peak national bodies like the Australian Curriculum Studies Association, they put out journals regularly condemning Australian society as riven with inequality, white supremacism. There's this whole cultural left ideology that's permeated universities, teacher education, many of the subject associations.
How do you combat that? I mean, what we need, obviously, is reform in the education system from the grassroots up, from R to 7 to 12 and into universities, because just on that one point you mentioned about condemning Australian society, we don't teach the fundamental achievements of Western civilisation in our schools anymore. We only teach grievances.
When I reviewed the national curriculum in 2014, I co-chaired that review. That was obvious. We had hundreds of submissions, many complaining that what Geoffrey Blainey, the great historian, called a black armband view was prevalent in the way our history was taught. You only have to look at the way teachers now in universities are taught about white supremacism, that there's nothing beneficial about Western culture. It's this idea that somehow you can denigrate, put down the very culture, the very civilisation that's achieved so much. So I'd be saying we need to get that balance right. Now, you know, John Howard talked about the battle of ideas. Unfortunately, we've lost that battle when it comes to education. And whether it's the minister, state or federal, whether it's those who are looking at university education courses, we need to get a forensic examination of what's happening. And then we need to work hard to try and turn that around.
Spot on, Kevin. Thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Wise words there from Kevin Donnelly, and it's great to have a pre-recorded interview. I was able to post on Instagram while that went to air, so follow us on Instagram. We're playing around on there a little bit at the moment at ChrisKenny_Sky.